Adrian Blackwood was the kind of man who made people stop and stare the moment he entered a room. Tall, striking, and with the kind of confidence that seemed to flow effortlessly from his very being. He embodied the dream so many aspired to. He was young, a self-made millionaire who had built his empire from little more than ambition and clever investments. In the eyes of society, Adrian wasn't just wealthy. He was charismatic, magnetic, a figure whose name was whispered at parties and splashed across glossy magazines. He attended charity galas not merely as a guest, but as the star attraction, the man whose presence elevated an event from ordinary to legendary. His sharp suits, disarming smile, and polished speeches made him the golden boy of the city, admired not just for his money but for his seeming generosity. By his side, always graceful and radiant, was his wife Elena. To the public, she was the perfect counterpart to his brilliance. She had once been a rising star in the legal field, intelligent and ambitious in her own right, but she chose to step back from her career to stand beside her husband, offering unwavering support as he built his empire. Her elegance was unmatched, soft-spoken yet commanding in her own quiet way. She carried herself with dignity, her presence soothing and luminous, the kind of woman people described as born to be admired. Now, heavily pregnant with their first child, Elena embodied a vision of timeless beauty and maternal grace, making the public fall in love with her all over again. Together, Adrian and Elena seemed unstoppable, the golden couple destined to live a fairy tale that others could only dream of. Their life unfolded like a carefully written story. Paparazzi captured them arriving at exclusive venues in sleek black cars, Elena's hand tucked delicately into Adrian's arm. Magazines featured spreads of their lavish mansion, sprawling gardens, and vacations on private islands. Reporters praised Adrian's business acumen while highlighting Elena's poise as the devoted wife. To outsiders, they had everything: wealth, beauty, power, and now the promise of a child to complete the picture. It was perfection crafted for display, an illusion of harmony that seemed unshakable. Yet, behind the perfection, shadows lurked. Adrian's late nights at the office grew longer, excuses more frequent. He grew distracted during dinners, often stepping away to take phone calls in hushed tones. His once attentive gaze now seemed far away, his touches colder, as though Elena were fading from his focus. The cracks were faint, almost invisible to the adoring public, but to Elena, they were there. Silent warnings that their flawless life was beginning to unravel. Elena had always been more than just the beautiful wife of a millionaire. Before she became Mrs. Blackwood, she was Elena Carter, a brilliant young lawyer who had earned respect in courtrooms with her sharp mind and unshakable poise. Her colleagues admired her drive, her ability to stand firm even when facing seasoned attorneys twice her age. She had dreamed of building a name of her own, carving out a future defined by her merit and intellect. But when Adrian entered her life, everything began to shift. He swept her into a whirlwind of romance, his ambition dazzling, his charm impossible to resist. Slowly, almost without realizing it, Elena let go of the long nights at the office, the endless case files, the competitive fire. She convinced herself that love and partnership were worth more than accolades and professional triumphs. Sacrifice, for her, became second nature. She was the steady presence at Adrian's side when he attended his first fundraising dinner. She coordinated events, charmed business partners, and remembered the small details about people that Adrian often overlooked. Behind his meteoric rise stood her quiet labor, her unspoken willingness to put his needs before her own. While he was praised for brilliance, Elena was the one holding everything together in silence. When Adrian was tired and short-tempered, she bore his moods with patience. When he was distracted, she convinced herself he was simply stressed with work. Pregnancy added another layer of vulnerability. Once radiant with energy, Elena found herself navigating fatigue, morning sickness, and the quiet fears that every expectant mother carries. She longed for Adrian's warmth, his support, his old habit of placing a reassuring hand on her back when she walked into a room. Instead, she was often alone, lying awake at night in their vast bedroom while Adrian claimed late meetings kept him away. She would trace her hand over her growing belly, whispering promises to her unborn child, assuring it of love even when her own heart ached. Sometimes, when she looked back, she missed the Adrian she had first fallen in love with, the man who had laughed with her over cheap wine, who had once knelt to tie her shoe in the rain, who had dreamed not of money but of a shared life built with honesty. That man felt like a ghost now, replaced by someone who seemed too distant to notice her sacrifices. Still, Elena endured, believing that love was about weathering storms, even when the storm felt endless. Sophia arrived in Adrian's life like a spark that set fire to dry grass, sudden, bright, and dangerous. She was everything Elena was not, bold where Elena was gentle, provocative where Elena was refined, and shamelessly ambitious where Elena had once been selfless. Sophia was younger, with striking features that turned heads in any room, and she knew how to use them. She carried herself with the confidence of a woman who had learned early on that beauty could open doors wealth alone could not. To Adrian, who was used to admiration but craved excitement, she was intoxicating. She worked in the world of luxury branding, a socialite with connections to designers and influencers. Their first meeting had been at an exclusive launch party. Adrian had been drawn to her laughter, a little too loud for the setting but impossible to ignore, and Sophia wasted no time in drawing him into her orbit. Unlike Elena, she didn't listen quietly or gently guide him. She challenged him, teased him, and fed his ego by making him feel both desired and powerful. Adrian, with all his wealth and reputation, enjoyed the thrill of being pursued not with admiration but with fiery boldness. The affair began discreetly, secret hotel suites, late-night texts, rushed encounters that Adrian justified as just a distraction. But Sophia was not content to remain in the shadows. She thrived on being seen, on knowing she could topple the illusion of perfection Adrian displayed with Elena. For her, being the mistress wasn't about love, it was about leverage, status, and the thrill of taking what the world assumed was untouchable. She flaunted expensive gifts, dropped cryptic hints at parties, and smiled knowingly when Adrian's name was mentioned. For Adrian, Sophia represented a world free of responsibility. With Elena, there were expectations, sacrifices, and the looming role of fatherhood. With Sophia, there was only recklessness, adrenaline, and the illusion that he was still untamed. But even in his intoxication, Adrian failed to see that Sophia wasn't captivated by him alone. She was enthralled by his money, his name, his spotlight. She had no interest in being hidden away, and Adrian, emboldened by arrogance, began to stop hiding her at all. The contrast between the two women could not have been sharper. Elena was loyalty, grace, and quiet strength. Sophia was fire, temptation, and shameless hunger. And as Adrian strayed further into Sophia's grasp, he failed to realize he was weaving the threads of his own downfall, threads that would soon unravel in front of everyone watching. The night of the gala shimmered with the kind of extravagance only the city's elite could conjure. Crystal chandeliers glittered above tables draped in white silk, waiters floated across the room with trays of champagne, and photographers lingered near the entrance, eager to capture each arrival. The event was billed as the social gathering of the season, a fundraiser hosted by one of the most powerful foundations in the country. Politicians, celebrities, and tycoons had gathered, each playing their part in a carefully choreographed dance of wealth and influence. All eyes, as always, were waiting for Adrian Blackwood, the golden boy of high society. When the sleek black limousine pulled up, anticipation rippled through the crowd. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned forward, and gasps followed as Adrian stepped out, not with his radiant, pregnant wife Elena, but with Sophia on his arm. She glowed in a daring red gown that clung to her figure, her lips painted the same shade, her hand looped possessively through Adrian's. The audacity of the moment was electric. Whispers spread like wildfire. The public had speculated about Adrian's private life, but speculation was one thing. Parading his mistress into the city's most exclusive gala was another. Adrian seemed unfazed by the shock, even relishing it. His smile was practiced, arrogant, as if daring the crowd to judge him. Sophia, basking in the scandal, leaned closer to him, her eyes sparkling with triumph. Together, they walked into the ballroom, the cameras capturing every detail. The confidence in Adrian's stride, the smug tilt of Sophia's chin, the awkward silence that followed in their wake. Guests exchanged wide-eyed glances, murmuring behind raised glasses. If Elena was absent, it was assumed she had chosen to avoid the humiliation of such a public betrayal. But the evening was far from over. Halfway through the gala, as the music swelled and the host prepared to take the stage, the entrance doors opened once more. Heads turned, and time seemed to freeze. There she was, Elena. She glided into the ballroom in a flowing midnight blue gown that shimmered under the lights, her baby bump a proud curve beneath the fabric. Gasps filled the air, louder than the orchestra playing in the corner. Reporters scrambled to refocus their cameras, hungry for the unfolding drama. And then came the detail that turned whispers into stunned silence. Elena was not alone. Walking beside her, hand intertwined with hers, was Daniel Sterling, the formidable CEO of Adrian's fiercest rival company. He was tall, commanding, his presence magnetic in a tailored black suit. The sight of them together struck the room like lightning. Elena's serene smile contrasted with Adrian's sudden stiffness, his confident mask cracking for the first time. The illusion was shattered. The perfect couple was no more. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath as Elena stepped forward, her hand resting securely in Daniel Sterling's. Every flash of the cameras illuminated her face, calm and composed, her beauty magnified not by makeup or jewels but by the quiet dignity with which she carried herself. She did not appear as a betrayed wife or a broken woman. Instead, she radiated the confidence of someone who had made a choice and owned it completely. The curve of her baby bump only added to the power of her presence. She was a woman on the verge of motherhood, walking with her head held high, unashamed and unafraid. Guests whispered furiously, their voices a blend of admiration and disbelief. For years, Elena had been the picture of devotion, the perfect counterpart to Adrian's empire. And now here she was, no longer standing behind her husband, but beside another man, a rival no less, someone Adrian had battled in boardrooms and business negotiations. The symbolism was impossible to miss. Adrian had paraded his mistress in arrogance, but Elena's arrival with Daniel struck like a calculated move on a chessboard, elegant yet devastating. Daniel's presence was equally commanding. Unlike Sophia, who clung to Adrian with desperate bravado, Daniel carried himself with quiet strength. He didn't overshadow Elena, he supported her, letting her be the focus of the moment. His hand in hers wasn't possessive but protective, a gesture of respect and solidarity. He looked at her not as a trophy but as a woman deserving admiration. In that subtle difference, the crowd saw everything. Adrian, who had been basking in attention moments earlier, now stood frozen, his smile fading into a rigid line. His grip on Sophia's arm tightened, though she seemed less thrilled now that the spotlight had shifted entirely to Elena. Sophia's smugness faltered, her expression betraying unease as she realized that she was no longer the center of the scandal, but merely a footnote in a larger, more humiliating spectacle. The tension in the room was palpable. Guests leaned closer, eager not to miss a single flicker of expression on Adrian's face. He looked enraged, blindsided, and for the first time, vulnerable. Elena, however, did not waver. She greeted acquaintances with a graceful nod, her smile measured, her gaze steady. In that moment, she was not the abandoned wife but the woman who had rewritten the narrative, transforming humiliation into power with a single entrance. Elena had first crossed paths with Daniel Sterling months earlier at a charity event aimed at funding scholarships for underprivileged students. She had been seated at his table, a quiet placement arranged by the organizers who thought pairing Adrian's wife with Adrian's rival might be amusing. Adrian himself had cancelled last minute, sending Elena alone, a decision that left her visibly uncomfortable in a room buzzing with power. Daniel had noticed immediately. Unlike most, he didn't treat her as a decorative figurehead to Adrian's empire. He spoke to her directly, asking thoughtful questions about her background, her interests, her opinions on the cause they were supporting. For the first time in a long while, Elena felt seen not as an extension of Adrian, but as herself. Over the weeks that followed, their paths crossed again at similar gatherings. What began as polite conversation evolved into quiet companionship. Daniel admired Elena's intelligence, the way she spoke with conviction, and her ability to soften even the most rigid of rooms with her empathy. He sensed the loneliness behind her poised smile, though he never pried. Instead, he offered steady respect, a kind of attention that came without demands or hidden motives. Elena found herself looking forward to those rare moments when she could speak freely, unburdened by the weight of Adrian's growing indifference. At first, she resisted the bond that was forming, reminding herself of her vows, of the love she had once shared with Adrian. But every unanswered phone call, every night Adrian chose to spend elsewhere, chipped away at the foundation of her marriage. Meanwhile, Daniel's quiet presence became a source of comfort she hadn't realized she needed. He never pushed, never crossed a line, but his support filled the spaces Adrian had abandoned. When she decided to arrive at the gala with Daniel, it wasn't born of impulsive revenge. It was deliberate, a statement that she was no longer a silent bystander to Adrian's betrayals. Daniel wasn't just a rival CEO, he was the symbol of Elena's newfound strength, the reminder that she deserved respect, dignity, and a voice of her own. The moment Elena and Daniel entered the ballroom, the atmosphere shifted from hushed whispers to open tension. Adrian, who had strutted in with Sophia on his arm, could no longer keep up the facade of control. His jaw tightened, his eyes locked on Elena with a mixture of fury and disbelief. He had expected her to retreat into silence, to suffer her humiliation quietly as she always had. Instead, here she was, radiant and untouchable, walking hand in hand with the one man Adrian despised more than any other. Unable to contain himself, Adrian abandoned the polite conversations around him and stormed toward Elena. His voice, though lowered, carried sharp edges that nearby guests couldn't help but overhear. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed, his eyes darting to the cameras still flashing in their direction. "With him. In public." Elena didn't flinch. Her gaze was calm, her tone measured but firm. "I could ask you the same question. Except I already know the answer." Her eyes flicked briefly to Sophia, who stood awkwardly a few steps behind Adrian, clutching her glass of champagne as though it could shield her from the stares. The crowd circled closer, pretending to mingle while shamelessly listening. Murmurs spread as Elena's words cut through the air. Adrian's carefully constructed image was unraveling, not in private but in front of the very people who once idolized him. "You think parading around with Sterling makes you strong?" Adrian sneered, his voice shaking with anger. "You're embarrassing yourself. And me." Before Elena could respond, Daniel stepped forward, his presence steady and commanding. "She's not embarrassing herself," he said evenly, his voice low but carrying enough weight for those nearby to hear. "She's reminding you that respect is earned, not demanded." His hand remained at Elena's side, protective but never possessive. Adrian's face darkened, his composure slipping further. He wanted to lash out, but every eye in the room was on him, every phone recording, every whisper documenting his collapse. For the first time, he looked cornered, stripped of the power he once wielded so effortlessly. Elena stood tall, her chin lifted, her silence louder than any insult she could have spoken. In that moment, she had seized control of the narrative, leaving Adrian to flounder in the wreckage of his arrogance. By morning, the scandal had spread like wildfire. Every major newspaper carried the photographs. Adrian Blackwood arriving at the gala with Sophia draped over his arm, only to be upstaged hours later by Elena, glowing and pregnant, walking confidently beside Daniel Sterling. Headlines screamed betrayal, humiliation, and revenge. Talk shows dissected the images frame by frame, speculating on what Elena's poised smile meant, on how deep Adrian's affair had been, on whether Daniel and Elena had crossed the line into romance. Social media was even more ruthless. Hashtags bearing Elena's name trended globally, with thousands praising her composure and strength. Memes flooded timelines, comparing Sophia's forced smirk to Elena's graceful entrance. "The real queen," one popular post read beneath a photo of Elena holding Daniel's hand. Public opinion turned swiftly. Where Adrian had once been celebrated as the charming, philanthropic millionaire, he was now mocked as arrogant and careless. His betrayal wasn't just a personal scandal, it was a public downfall. Investors began calling board members within hours. If Adrian was reckless enough to flaunt an affair at a charity gala, what else might he risk in his business decisions? Whispers of instability grew, and markets responded with unease. The empire Adrian had built on charm and image suddenly felt fragile, exposed. For Sophia, the thrill of the spotlight soured quickly. At first, she enjoyed the attention, savoring the photographs of her clinging to Adrian's arm. But as the narrative shifted, she realized she was painted as the opportunist, the woman who clung to a man even as his world collapsed. The glamorous red gown that had once felt like armor now looked like a costume in a tragedy she hadn't fully signed up for. Meanwhile, Elena's star only rose. People admired her not just for enduring humiliation, but for the way she turned it into strength. Her calm defiance resonated with women who had endured silent betrayals, with men who respected dignity over bravado, with anyone who understood that true power often came in silence, not spectacle. She had transformed from the quiet wife in Adrian's shadow into the symbol of grace under fire. Adrian's downfall began quietly, like a crack in glass that spread until the entire pane shattered. Within days of the gala, investors pulled out of deals they had once begged to be part of. Stock in his flagship company dipped, then plummeted, as confidence in his leadership evaporated. Business magazines that had once praised him as a visionary now printed biting headlines about his arrogance and lack of judgment. What had been his greatest asset, his spotless image, was now the very reason people were fleeing from him. Sophia, once smug in her new role at his side, started to grow restless. She hadn't signed up to be the partner of a man whose empire was crumbling. The gifts slowed, the invitations dwindled, and the whispers about her being nothing more than a reckless distraction grew louder. Adrian, already spiraling, lashed out at her in frustration, and their once thrilling affair soured quickly. She began to distance herself, making excuses, avoiding appearances, and eventually vanishing from his side entirely. Without her, Adrian looked even more pathetic, abandoned by both his mistress and his wife, left to face the wreckage alone. Elena, in stark contrast, found herself embraced by the very society that once pitied her. She was praised for her grace at the gala, for her refusal to lower herself to Adrian's level. Interviews requested her presence, though she declined them, preferring her silence to speak louder than any words. She became a symbol of resilience, a reminder that dignity could triumph over betrayal. Behind closed doors, she focused on her health, on preparing for the arrival of her child, and on slowly rediscovering the ambitions she had once set aside. Daniel remained a steady presence, never exploiting the situation for his own gain. Where others saw an opportunity for scandal, he saw only a woman who deserved support and respect. His calm strength anchored Elena during the whirlwind of attention, and his respect gave her the space to breathe again. For the first time in years, she felt like she was not merely surviving, but beginning to live on her own terms. Adrian, meanwhile, withdrew from the public eye. He no longer attended events, no longer gave speeches, no longer appeared in glossy magazines. The man who had once basked in adoration was left isolated, haunted by the realization that he had sacrificed everything, his wife, his reputation, his empire, for an illusion of power that vanished the moment Elena chose to rise above him. Adrian's first attempt to reclaim what he had lost came in the form of a late-night visit to the mansion he once shared with Elena. He arrived unannounced, his suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, the sharp edges of his confidence dulled. Elena, surprised to see him at the door, hesitated only a moment before letting him in. For the first time in years, Adrian did not lead with arrogance. Instead, he spoke with desperation. He told her he still loved her, that he had made mistakes, that Sophia had meant nothing. He begged her to forgive him, to let him come home, to rebuild what they had together. Elena listened in silence, her hand resting on the gentle curve of her stomach. She remembered the woman she used to be, the one who would have melted at his words, who would have sacrificed her pride for the sake of preserving the illusion of love. But that woman was gone. She had endured too many late nights alone, too many whispered phone calls, too much humiliation. She had carried the weight of the marriage while Adrian had treated her as an accessory, and she had finally realized she deserved more. When she spoke, her voice was steady, calm, but resolute. She told him that love was not enough when trust had been shattered beyond repair. She told him their child deserved peace, not the chaos of a home poisoned by betrayal. She did not scream, did not lash out, did not even shed a tear. Her strength was in her composure, in the way she stood tall while he crumbled before her. Adrian reached for her hand, but she pulled away gently, not out of cruelty but out of finality. He understood then that there would be no reconciliation, no second chance. For the first time, he realized that his power, his wealth, his charm, none of it could bend her anymore. Elena had chosen herself, and in doing so, she had stripped him of the control he had always assumed he held. When he left that night, the silence in the mansion felt different. To Adrian, it was the sound of loss. To Elena, it was the sound of freedom. Elena's life began to transform in ways she had once thought impossible. No longer tethered to Adrian's shadow, she rediscovered parts of herself she had quietly buried. She returned to her passion for law, not in the relentless grind of late-night case files, but in meaningful work, consulting for non-profits and advocacy groups that supported women and families in crisis. It wasn't about reclaiming her old career to prove something, it was about finding fulfillment on her own terms. Each day she stepped into her office, she felt a sense of purpose that had been missing for years. Motherhood became another pillar of her rebirth. She embraced her pregnancy with joy rather than fear, preparing for her child with hope instead of loneliness. Where once she had lain awake at night wondering where Adrian was, she now sat in quiet anticipation, imagining the future she would build with her baby. Her home, once echoing with emptiness, filled with warmth as she decorated the nursery, chose names, and allowed herself to dream freely without the weight of betrayal pressing down on her. Daniel remained close, but never in a way that overshadowed her independence. He offered encouragement when she needed it, a listening ear when the weight of the past felt heavy, but he never tried to define her journey. He reminded her of her strength when she doubted herself, but he also gave her space to rise on her own. In him, Elena saw not just a partner but a reflection of the respect she had always deserved. The world continued to watch, and where Adrian's name had become synonymous with scandal, Elena's became a symbol of resilience. She was no longer introduced as Adrian Blackwood's wife, but as Elena Carter Blackwood, the woman who had faced public humiliation and emerged stronger than before. Her story resonated with countless others who had endured silent betrayals, inspiring them to find courage in their own lives. With each step forward, Elena shed the remnants of the past. Her rebirth was not defined by revenge or bitterness but by strength, dignity, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. For the first time in years, she was truly free. Wealth, power and pride had once seemed untouchable shields around Adrian Blackwood, but in the end, they proved to be fragile illusions. His downfall wasn't orchestrated by competitors in boardrooms or the collapse of a financial empire. It came from within, from the arrogance that led him to believe he could betray with impunity and still maintain control. The gala had not just exposed his affair, it had dismantled the image he had worked so carefully to build. The man once celebrated as charming and invincible was now remembered for his recklessness, his pride, and the humiliation that followed him everywhere. Elena's journey told a different story. What began as heartbreak became transformation. She had entered the gala as a wife overshadowed by her husband's betrayal and left it as a woman who had reclaimed her voice and dignity. Her strength had not come from anger or revenge but from the quiet choice to no longer be diminished. She reminded the world, and herself, that grace could be more powerful than spectacle, that dignity could eclipse arrogance, and that resilience was its own form of triumph. Daniel's role in the story underscored a truth Adrian had forgotten. Respect and kindness are stronger than wealth and bravado. Where Adrian saw Elena as part of his image, Daniel saw her as her own person, worthy of admiration not because of her beauty or status, but because of her strength. His steady presence highlighted the stark contrast between two men, one who craved power and one who understood that true power lay in compassion. For Adrian, there was no redemption, at least not yet. He was left with the ruins of what he had taken for granted, watching from the sidelines as the woman he once believed he controlled built a life without him. His pride had blinded him, his arrogance had betrayed him, and now his punishment was the emptiness of a legacy tarnished by his own hand. For Elena, however, the ending was not one of loss but of renewal. Her child symbolized new beginnings, her work gave her purpose, and her independence gave her strength. She had survived betrayal and emerged unbroken, proving that even the most carefully crafted illusions could crumble, but truth and dignity would always endure.